This podcast is brought to you in part by Singin Dog Double Reed Supplies. Singin Dog Double Reeds is an online double reed shop and one of the largest suppliers of high quality and affordable professional and student reeds for oboe and bassoon in the USA. Please visit www.singindog.com to see all of their products. That's SINGINDOG.com.
Dedicated to providing excellent handmade oboe and bassoon reeds to discriminating double reed players of all ages and abilities, Double or Nothing Reeds has recently expanded to sell double reed tools and supplies, gift items, and more. This includes knives, knife blades, thread, staples, cane, bags, and resources for students. As authorized Fox and Yamaha dealers, they offer an extensive range of oboes and bassoons for all levels. In addition, they sell quality used instruments on consignment. If you're looking for private oboe lessons but can't find anyone nearby, Double or Nothing Reeds offers oboe lessons via Skype. Visit doubleornothingreeds.com for good quality and affordable reed-making supplies and accessories, lessons, instruments, and much more. That's doubleornothingreeds.com.
Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
a podcast for oboists, bassoonists,
and the people who love them. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 11 of Double Reed Dish. Galit, how's it going?
It's going great, Jackie. How are you?
I'm doing okay. It's the last couple of weeks of the semester, which are crazy enough, but my puppy, well, he's not a puppy anymore. He's my puppy, Buddy.
He'll always be a puppy, Jackie.
Exactly. Buddy, who the listeners have heard about before, is actually having a little bit of health trouble, which is a bummer, but we're going to be okay. But it's a lot of juggling medication schedule with teaching schedule and driving back and forth 3 or 4 times a day. And so I'm glad I only have 2 weeks of that to juggle. But, it's all going to be good and surprisingly still pretty galvanized for this point in the semester. How about you?
Oh, I'm good. We have 1.5 weeks left of class, and I'm just really looking forward to summer. I know the students are over it. It's a really hard time because I don't know about you, but I always feel like fall goes by really, really quickly, and spring just kind of slows to a grinding halt by this time. So, yeah, but we're good. Everything's good, and I hope Buddy gets better soon.
Well, do you have any fun plans for the summer?
I do. I am planning a recital for the fall. And I'm really excited about this recital because before when I was planning recitals, I'd be like, okay, well, I think I should do like a diverse array of pieces. And you kind of like you do in school where you're like, okay, well, I need a representative from all of the time periods. But this time I'm doing a recital that's really special to me. And there is kind of an Indian and Jewish theme all the way through, which is really exciting for me because I'm, half Indian and I'm Jewish. So it's like I'm going to play pieces by Simon Sargent and our good friend Dan Schwartz, who wrote this amazing English horn and electronics piece, and a composer I just learned about named Rena Esmail, who's doing amazing things all over the world, really, but she's based out in L.A., and a sonata by Srul Glick, which I'm trying to get the music for. But it's going to be really exciting. Oh, and Jenny Brandon also. And, yeah, the 3 desert pieces kind of going in with the Jewish theme. You get it?
Mm. Oh, my gosh. That's awesome. I love it.
But, yeah, I'm really excited because it really hits close to my heart. All of these different composers. It's like taking pieces of myself and putting it in a collage. I'm really excited about it. I think it's going to be good. What are your plans for the summer?
Well, first of all, your recital sounds amazing. I love that. You know that me as a Yakima person, I love playing the music of Native American composers, and maybe we should distinguish that when you say Indian, you mean India.
India, yeah.
Yes, because it can get confusing between us, and in fact, the first time I brought you to a powwow, I said, wrong kind of Indian.
By the way, I did a class this week on the music of underrepresented composers for my Music Caprice class, and I included Jared Tate and A Tribe Called Red, and that is all thanks to you. I wouldn't have known about those groups without you.
Awesome. I love it. Well, my summer plans, I can't decide, if people will envy me or pity me when they hear. But I had some things I was kind of shooting for travel-wise and whatnot that unfortunately ended up falling through. And I was talking to my husband, and I was like, summer is a time where we don't have to balance teaching schedules and students and all that type of thing as much. And so I really like to take advantage of it as a time to focus intensely and ideally have a project or a goal. And with these things falling through, I'm kind of worried that I'm going to be in free fall, and I want to really be focused, but I'm not quite sure what to focus on that's not going to be general and that is going to really inspire me to take advantage of the time. And he said, well, is there a piece that you've always wanted to learn that, kind of takes more time than the average work? And I was like, no, not really. And then I thought about it for like 5 more seconds, and I went, yes, the Barrio Sequenza for bassoon. And he was like, you should learn that. And I was like, I should, because I've always wanted to learn it, and I've always said, some summer when I have nothing to do, I'll lock myself in a practice room and I'll learn the Barrio Sequenza.
Wow.
So my plan for the summer is to embark upon learning the Barrio Sequenza. And in fact, I've painted myself into a little bit of a corner because I have scheduled my faculty recital for late January, early February. And here at Southeast, we do it as a concert series so people can subscribe to or whatnot. And so we need titles. And they said, okay, Jackie, what are you going to do as the title to advertise for your faculty recital? And I said, how about Sequenza 12? And so they're selling tickets with the title as Sequenza 12. So I got to get it done. I'm hoping 9 months will be enough.
You cannot let these people down.
Exactly. So I'll buy the Pascal Galois book and the score and learn to circular breathe, and that is my goal for the summer. So, yeah, and I might make a couple videos or a couple blog posts or something chronicling my experience, who knows, or maybe I'll just sit in a corner and cry for the entire summer. I don't know, but yeah, so we'll see. Updates on Sequenza summer.
Let me know if you need a friend.
But we have some kind of cool stuff going on with the podcast over the summer. Why don't you tell the listeners what we've got planned for them, extra goodies over the summer?
Big plans. We are starting a series of bonus episode called Mavericks, in which we are going to talk to double reed players from all over the United States who are doing interesting, off-the-beaten-path kind of things that is outside the realm of college teaching and orchestral playing. And I'm really excited to announce that our first feature of Mavericks is the one and only Lacolian Washington, who, well, I guess you would be a better person to introduce Lacolian since you play the bassoon.
Yeah, he's going to talk to us about diversity in the arts and his work with the Prism Ensemble in the Memphis area and that type of thing, which I'm really excited about. I've never really forgotten in Erin Hannigan's interview when she says that her measure of success is that you are able to make a living with, in her case, the oboe, right? And a lot of times we equate that to a life in academia or a life in a symphony orchestra, and that's your full-time job. And for some of the people that we're going to be interviewing in this series, that is true. They do have teaching jobs or they do play in orchestras, but they're doing innovative things in addition to those positions they have. And then we're also going to be interviewing some people who operate completely outside those realms or have decidedly left those realms in order to pursue a different path. And as we're looking at an increasingly diverse field that needs more things from us and benefits from creativity, we want to allow our listeners to be inspired by and hopefully get some cool creative ideas from these people and start their own creative projects.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really excited about this. It's just going to be the interviews, so they should be shorter episodes. And yeah, it's going to be a continuous project. I hope we get to bring a lot of different perspectives to all of you. All right. Well, my shout out this week is a book called Grit, The Power of Passion and Perseverance by Angela Duckworth. And like you just mentioned regarding our Mavericks series about needing to look outside the box and be creative in order to have a career doing what we do, Angela Duckworth explores the special blend of passion and perseverance that she calls grit, and how, the people who succeed aren't necessarily, when you think of the most talented people you've ever known, it may or may not include those people, because grit is something extra and really special. And she talks about examples of people who have it. You can take a quiz to see how much grit you have, and ways that you can develop grit and incorporate it more into your daily life, including, your relationships, not just your career, but, all parts of life. It's really good. I enjoy it a lot.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. My shout out is also a book. My book is Quiet by Susan Cain, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And this is a really popular book. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of our listeners have encountered it already. But I originally looked into this book kind of as just a place to feel understood, as a more introverted person. I anticipated feeling very justified in all of my feelings and behavior, and didn't expect a lot more out of it. But I think it's a really good book for anyone. Well, I think for people, period, but especially teachers. I was surprised at how the book not only made me as an introvert feel understood within its pages, but also helped me understand different types of personality traits, people who are more introverted than myself, people who are extroverted, people who are very extroverted. And for us as teachers, I think it is really important that we understand different personality types and how people learn, how people value things, their currency, what their comfort zone is, how to gauge that, how to push them outside of it in a nourishing way, and how much is maybe too much and how to gauge those things. And I got so much more from this book than I was anticipating, and especially if you are a teacher of any age or just the collaborative nature of music. I can't imagine someone reading this book, introvert or extrovert, and not getting a lot out of it in terms of interaction. And I was even reading it going, oh, that exercise I do, I could reconceive that to maybe have it work better for more types of people and that type of thing. So I found it really valuable.
That's awesome.
Right out of the box, Genda reed knives are the sharpest reed knives on the market. Each original Genda reed knife is handcrafted using traditional Asian knife-making techniques. Japanese steel is first forged into shape, hollow ground, and then hardened to Rockwell 5860, making the edge on the blade very strong yet durable. Each blade is then polished and hand-sharpened to perfection using shaped-in professional sharpening stones up to 8,000 grit. Genda even personalizes your reed knife before sending it. You can choose a right-handed, left-handed, or straight burr from their drop-down menu and easy-to-use website.
Genda has also announced new products for April of 2017, including the Genda Reed Tool Roll, a high-quality leather tool storage roll, including 3 large and 3 small sleeves, and 1 covered pouch to store your reed-making knives and tools. They also offer Genda leather reed knife sheaths and a Genda cutting block. Visit gendaindustries.com today.
The Southern Oboe Intensive provides a distinctive opportunity for oboists to spend 5 days immersed in world-class instruction. The intensive draws students from middle school through college graduates from throughout the United States. During the intensive, students at all levels are coached by James Sullivan of the Alabama Symphony, Russ DeLuna of the San Francisco Symphony, and Phil Ross of the St. Louis Symphony. Not only are these gentlemen exceptional oboists, but each brings extraordinary and unique experience and perspective to share with the participants. An additional one-of-a-kind benefit of the intensive is a recital performed by Mr. Sullivan, Mr. DeLuna, and Mr. Ross. Students will be instantly inspired by the level of artistry, collegialism, and joy evoked when these 3 superb musicians collaborate. Visit southernoboeintensive.com for more information and to register. Complete registration before May 1st and receive a free reed specially made by Russ, James, or Phil, plus a 6-reed oboe reed case. That's southernoboeintensive.com.
So our interview for this episode is Sue Heineman, Principal Bassoon of the National Symphony Orchestra. And I don't know about you, Galit, but I found this interview to be so inspiring and really helpful and beneficial in terms of how I think about things and how I approach practicing and whatnot.
Yeah, this interview was so good. And I loved the stuff that she talks, like she really addresses imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And she talks about auditioning and like really good audition tips. It made me want to go take an audition.
Oh, absolutely. After having this interview, I assigned my students who are prepping for, juries some of the things that she talks about in here with the flashcards and the how to assess your own preparation. And so I have every confidence that our listeners will get so much out of this interview. Without any further ado, here's Sue Heineman.
I am so pleased to welcome Sue Heineman to the podcast. Sue, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
I would love to start by asking you about your training and educational journey and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, so yeah, I started playing bassoon relatively young. I was actually 10 years old when I started, which I think is pretty young for a bassoonist. And I had been playing piano for a few years before that. I'm the youngest of 3 kids, so all of us had piano lessons. And I don't come from a musical family specifically. Like, neither my parents were musicians, but my dad really liked classical music, and that was what was playing on the radio and in the house and the car. So we took piano lessons, and then we all sequentially took up orchestral instruments. And my first choice was actually cello. Can you hear my dog shaking? She decided it's time to move. I wanted to play the cello, actually, but it was just sort of random. Like, my sister played violin, so I wanted something different. And the school didn't have any cellos. So they said, how about this nice viola? And I said, whatever. I didn't care. And they handed me this little tiny viola, which was actually a violin with, I still don't know if it was viola strings or just like, they just tuned it really slack. But I played that for a few months and I just wasn't really into it for whatever reason. And I definitely remember the string teacher who would come into the school every week was this grumpy old man and was really mean and insulting and told me my brain was like a noodle. And I didn't like him. So I thought, okay, I'm done with string instruments. How about a wind instrument? And I knew enough to know that I didn't want to play flute. That just seemed girly or something. I don't know. That just wasn't me. But any of the other winds would have been fine. And so the teacher thought, let's give her the bassoon. And that turned out to be really cool because within a week I was playing in the orchestra. And my first piece in the orchestra was this little abridged version of Beethoven's Fifth. And I got to have my independent line. And so I was just in love with orchestra from that point on. Just somehow, even though I had one line, it was more interesting to me than what I was doing on piano because I just liked the sound of all the strings. And I'd been to so many concerts by that point because my dad would take us to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I was playing bassoon, and I was really excited. I remember my first day carrying it home, and I had my reed in my mouth because I thought, you got to keep it wet. I was taking the subway home with my reed in my mouth, carrying this giant case and hoping that somebody would ask me, like, what's that fascinating thing you're carrying? And then I got private lessons the next year because the school music teacher, he was a clarinetist, and his knowledge on bassoon was limited. My first bassoon teacher was Ferdinand Del Negro, who is the guy that's under that enormous contrabassoon in the original Fantasia. So he was in his 80s at the time, and I studied with him for maybe 4 years, and I swear every year on his birthday he told me he had turned 83. This is these memories that I have. And I mean, he was a really sweet older guy, but he wasn't really demanding as a teacher, is what I recall. And at one point, my high school orchestra conductor suggested that I might want to give this other teacher a call, and her name was Shirley Curtis. And I never heard of her. I knew she was not connected to the Curtis Institute, but that's all I knew about her. And so I called her up, and I was babysitting at the time, and I had this glass of something. I was drinking a glass of something with ice in it. And I remember calling her up, and before I could even get out that my name was Susan and I wanted to take lessons with her, she interrupted me, and she's like, Sue, do you have ice in your mouth? Do you have any idea what that sounds like on the telephone? And I was so horrified. I was like, oh my God, she hates me already. And it's funny because up until that point, I was always Susan. And then it's like from that phone call on, I've been Sue. Like she is like this rebirth or something, restart everything with her. And she was just an amazing teacher for me. And, she was Judy LeClaire's teacher. So around the time I started studying with her was around the time Judy was winning the New York Phil audition. So, it's like I just really jumped into this whole more current, set of the bassoon world. Shirley had studied with Saul Schoenbach, not at Curtis, but I'm not even sure where. I can't remember. And Shirley's husband was a violist in the Philadelphia Orchestra. So I was just immersed in this world from then on, and got very serious because she was tough. I mean, the first time I played for her, she asked me what I thought my strengths and weaknesses were, and I said I thought I had pretty good technique, and I knew I could tongue pretty fast, but I thought maybe my tone wasn't so good. And she's like, Sue, your tone is fine, but your intonation surely is a lot to be desired. And then she told me that she was going to be putting me in this wind quintet. She'd coached all these quintets for many years at the Settlement Music School, this enormous quintet program. And she put me in a quintet with some seniors just because all of her bassoonists had graduated. And she let me know right away that, I was not at their level, and I was going to have to work my butt off to keep up with them. So, it was set right from the beginning. Going to have to work pretty hard for her. But, that was what I needed. Having a demanding teacher who would just lay it on the line, tell it like it was great for me. And I ended up getting a lot of experience in high school because I played in the youth orchestra and in the all-city orchestra, and I went to summer festivals. I went to Eastern Music Festival 3 years when I was in high school. I think maybe back then the standard might have been a little bit lower because there were a lot of high school kids then. Now it seems like it's more college. I'm not sure. But I had played tons of repertoire by the time I got to college, which was Eastman. There was never really any question about where I was going to go because that's where Shirley Curtis sent her students. They all went to Eastman. So I studied with Van Heusen for 4 years, and after that I had a Fulbright to Salzburg, where I studied with Milan Turkovic, and then I came back and got my master's at Juilliard, and I stayed there for several years freelancing after I finished school. I was really lucky to win principal bassoon in New Haven Symphony during my third year. I actually stayed at 1 extra year at Juilliard for a sort of artist diploma kind of a thing because they needed bassoonists and they offered me a free ride for a third year. So I was like, all right, I'll hang out. And, I remember it's a really hard time when you're getting out of school. I mean, this kind of gets into some of your other questions about directions of careers. But I remember really strongly like that a lot of people were like, okay, now I'm out of school. What do I do? And I have to start paying back my loans and paying rent, and I don't have anywhere to play. And I was so lucky to have an orchestra to kind of go right into and still have somewhere to play and concerts to work on. And I joined a quintet, the Aspen Wind Quintet, which doesn't exist anymore, and did a bunch of freelancing. And one thing I've omitted to say in any of this is that from age around 15, I was actually not even sure if I wanted to be a bassoonist at all, but I was just constantly agonizing over whether I was going to really do this. Maybe I should go to medical school. It was really tough, and I just kind of every year thought, okay, let me just give this one more year to see how this is going and if I want to keep doing it. And eventually I got into my late 20s, and during that time I'd been in New York. I'd been taking lots of orchestral auditions and doing very well at them. I was in a lot of finals for lots of different orchestras, San Francisco and Dallas and Milwaukee, Minnesota. I can't even remember. I listed them one time. And Montreal, did I mention that? That one, and then that was the kind of the doozy, because that was for assistant principal. It came down to be between me and John Clauser, and he got the job. And I walked away from that audition the same way I walked away from every audition, with this sense of relief that I didn't get it, because if I want a job, then I would be exposed as the fraud that I was, and I would be miserable, and the conductor would yell at me. And I just somehow, even though I had once, you would think validating success after another, I just always thought, like, that's it. That was a fake or something. So, actually, and I was pretty good friends with John Clauser. I had known him for years, and he and, I don't know if you guys know this, but the year I was at Tanglewood, it was me, Clauser, Danny Matsukawa, Kristen Jensen, and Kristen Sonnenborn, who's from Naples Philharmonic. So, I knew all of these people, and I remember since Clauser was going to be going to Montreal, he was asking me if I would consider coming down and auditioning for his job in Memphis, which he was leaving, principal job in Memphis. And I was like, I don't know, man. I'm starting to think maybe it's just time for me to do something else, and I'm not sure I want to be doing this. And I remember him saying that, there's just a lot more to life than blowing in this piece of wood. And around that same time, my sister, I think, said something to me, which was kind of like, you can agonize all you want about changing careers. And if you want to do it, you should probably do it, because she was in academia, so she knew, like, if I was going to go into graduate programs and spend another several years in school, I was pushing 30 at this point. Maybe I ought to get started. But she also told me, you should just know, like, whatever's making you unhappy in music, you're probably going to bring that to you. And the other thing, you're going to feel insecure and competitive and everything, and, the other things too. So it was a really interesting and difficult time, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I did audition for and win that Memphis job, but I decided, okay, I'll move to Memphis and I'm going to start taking classes in something else. And then I also, about a couple months later, auditioned for principal in New Mexico, and I won that. And so I thought, okay, I'll go do the same thing out there. It's sunnier there, and the Southwest looks really beautiful. So I moved to New Mexico, and I played in that orchestra, and did that for a few years. And then after a while, I just started thinking, this isn't actually so bad. Like, I'm making a living doing something that I still would do for free. I mean, through all the anxiety and imposter syndrome and everything, I never stopped actually loving orchestral music. I just wondered what's going to make me happy, kind of a thing. So I got involved with somebody in the orchestra there, and we both ended up winning jobs in the New Zealand Symphony. And so we moved to New Zealand and joined the orchestra there. And that relationship didn't end up working out, but by that point, now I'm in like my low 30s, and for the first time in my life, I'm thinking, like, this is actually really sweet. Like, I'm getting paid to live in paradise, to play amazing music. And so when auditions would come up in America, I would take them just because it was sort of something that I enjoyed doing, which probably sounds really weird, but I always actually liked the audition process. And you can ask me any question about that you want, like why. But I really like the process of working towards something, and it's a challenge too. I mean, once you're kind of in an orchestra and you have your established seat, it's almost like, well, now what? Because if you spend all these years auditioning, trying to get a better orchestra job, or trying to freelance, and get up to the next rung of freelancing or whatever, and then like here I was now in a job that could be a lifetime job, like in the New Zealand Symphony. Is a beautiful, amazing place to live, but I was still taking other auditions and flying back and forth, which is easier to then taking an audition from Albuquerque. Even though you have to fly much longer, at least you're starting at sea level, so you don't have to, worry about your altitude reads. So, at any rate, I was there for a few years, and I got an email from Danny asking me if I want to come and take the audition for second bassoon, start in the semifinals for the National Symphony. And I thought, sure, that's nice of him. And so I went there, and I won that job. It was going to be second bassoon, and that was like in January. And then, meanwhile, he'd already won Philly. So he's like, at the end of the audition, he was there. I saw him because at that time he was still playing in NSO. And, he said, there was a lot of talk during your audition that you're really kind of a principal player. You should seriously think about coming back for this principal audition. And I was like, no way, but I was like, I did win this, and so why not? I'll come back and I'll take that audition too. And now I started getting hungry. Like suddenly, I was 34 years old at this point, so I had many years of either not being sure I wanted to be in music at all, or thinking, this is pretty good. So it wasn't like I was hungry for big symphony job all my life, and I was like gunning for that the whole time. But, now that I was suddenly I could taste it a little bit again, I was like, all right, I'll come back and I'll take that audition. And I did not win that audition, but I was one of the final two. And the other finalist was the guy who won. It was Bill Bookman, who ended up not accepting it. He wanted to stay in Chicago. So I think this whole long-winded story about my audition really helped me to sort of transition from sort of maybe diminishing levels of imposter syndrome, but I still sort of felt like a little bit of an imposter, to somebody who could come in to this major symphony. And I was actually fairly relaxed about it, because what happened was that since I hadn't won the audition, they didn't actually offer me the job, even though Bill had turned it down. They said, we'll give you a 1-year contract on principal, and then, there's going to be another audition at some point. So I was just like, sweet, I can play principal for a year, no pressure, and I don't have to, I seriously considered even then not taking the audition for principal bassoon for long term, because I had really started to enjoy my life in New Zealand so much. So it was this, kind of weird way of like being dropped in an orchestra without knowing if I even wanted this job, and playing, and then thinking, of course, I totally want this. Like, this is awesome. And so I did end up taking the audition again and winning that one. And so that is how I came to the National Symphony, which was in 2000. So I've been there now 17 years. And it's awesome. I have to say, I feel so lucky that this ended up working out like this for me, because, like I said, even when in the dark throes of like teen and 20s angst, I always really loved playing in the orchestra. And so like to be able to actually finally do it in a stable situation it's amazing. It's like, I tell people sometimes it's kind of like summer camp forever. Like we went to, like I used to love to go to summer camp so much. Like we went to Eastern Music Festival, and then like during the year, my friends and I would sit around and listen to Mahler and weep, and think about when can we go back to EMF and play more Mahler, and, because we weren't playing Mahler in my little high school orchestra. And it's pretty good. I like it.
So you talked about this, and I'd love to dig deeper into your mentioning dealing with imposter syndrome and performance anxiety and whatnot. But we are in April, we're approaching May, and for a lot of students that means graduation. And you talked about this phenomenon where, not all of us have something waiting at the end of graduation, and this pull between, am I going to do music or am I going to find something else to do? So what would you tell those students who are maybe facing a graduation date with a big question mark at the end of it, who are, like you were, obviously highly capable, had made some really great educational opportunities for themselves? Like, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think, when I think about, like, what would I say to myself at that time, or what would I say to people, is that you really don't know where things are going to end up. And it's okay not to know that. Since I had come up from the 10th grade with Judy LeClaire as my sort of role model, and frankly, somebody that I was compared to by both Shirley and Van Hoosen, just in terms of whatever. I mean, it's hard to figure out a way to say it. Doesn't sound conceited, but, they would just say that, they thought that I might be able to do something like what she had done. Never any guarantees, because there just aren't that many jobs and so many other things have to fall in place. But, I had the sense that, well, that's what you do. I guess you finish your bachelor's degree, and then maybe if I don't win a job by 23, I'm a failure. So, there was a lot of, sort of pressure. I think that, for me, like I said, finding a place where I could continue to play was a very motivating force for me. And people have different levels of things that can motivate them, and what they need, and what's going to keep them practicing and keeping that stuff going. But I would say the uncertainty of what's going to happen is, like, even the people who seem like they're amazing, it's not guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed for them either. So when you kind of think about, like, how am I going to figure out what I want to do? How am I going to make these choices? Like, that's the part I think you can kind of step back from a little bit and say, like, you don't have to make your major life choices right now, because there's so many elements that are out of your control. If you can, obviously you need to pay your bills and expose yourself to things in life that are going to keep you engaged and practicing and somewhat positive. But I don't know. I had this boyfriend one time who was, like, from Texas, and he had this thing that he would always say. It was like, "Cain, no," in his cute little Texan accent. And I just thought, I wish I could be like that, because, I came from this, this background where, you're supposed to know what you're going to do from this step to this step to this step. And I don't think that was all that helpful. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, you're trying to think of, like, which of these thoughts are helpful and which aren't. And if you're, if you can just give yourself some space to, like, if you can stay in a better headspace, you're going to be more able to take advantage of opportunities as they come. And you should definitely take advantage of, every opportunity that comes up, and keep your eyes open for, what are other people doing and what kind of opportunities can you create for yourself and that kind of thing. I mean, I always had a kind of a, if I was going to do music, I wanted to be in an orchestra. So in that way, I'm not a good person to talk to about, like, what kind of alternate careers there are. Because I was always like, either I want to be in an orchestra or I'm going to, like, go to medical school or something like that. Like, not that it's just, that was where my head was at. So, I don't know. Just that it's, it's okay if you take your time and you think, like, I was talking about my background, on the one hand, I got a huge running start. Like, I arrived freshman year at Eastman, like, way ahead of the game. I was independent with making reeds, and I had played a ton of their orchestral repertoire and stuff. But then, it took me until I was 35 to land a major job. So it's not like I had a direct path but then like my colleague in the NSO, he doesn't even have a bachelor's degree. Like he started college barely playing the bassoon. He took lessons for like 2 years and then he got a job and I mean, he's amazing. So he jokes about my fancy, Northeast education and stuff, which he doesn't have, but it's like, I think it's important for people to know also that you don't have to have gone to the big schools. There's people coming from all over who are doing amazing things. So, and I knew, and there's also, if you think about your colleagues who seem to be so far ahead of you, it's not always the people that you think who are successful, which is only kind of, helpful in so far that it maybe can help you sort of relax and let things unfold. Because it's, you definitely have to have talent, but that's not enough. And there's so many other kinds of things that layer on top that determine whether somebody's going to be successful or just lucky.
So you mentioned that you struggled a lot with imposter syndrome, which I think many of us can relate to. And I'm wondering how you pulled yourself out of it, because you did say that eventually it stopped affecting you so much. So I'm wondering if it was just over time through having positive experiences and successes leading up to your appointment at the National Symphony that you kind of grew out of it with learning to trust yourself, or was it something that you kind of had to talk yourself out of? I know I would really be interested because this is something that I struggle with also.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I still struggle with this. I mean, this still occurs to me all the time. And, it's not a sense of like, oh, I don't think I deserve to be in this job or anything, but it's like, from year to year, you like think, well, was that good enough? And, I try to, keep in close touch with my colleagues to make sure like I have reality checks, which is for, sometimes that's actually a way to get rid of like all the negative chatter. Like I'll be so sure like that did not sound good. And then I'll go up like what, some of the other principal wins and I, frequently go and listen to recordings. We've actually started this thing where, we have Thursday, Friday, Saturday concerts. So like on Friday, we'll go and we'll listen to Thursday's concert. We'll kind of sit there. It's like a group hug. And we listen and we kind of cringe when our things are coming up and they were like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Or, oh, I think you were a little bit sharp here or flat here or whatever. And I mean, that kind of thing, just being open with your colleagues is super helpful because a lot of times, I mean, your colleague, it's called imposter syndrome because we're not actually imposters, right? It's something that, it's like a story we're telling ourselves that like, I shouldn't be here. I don't belong here. So if you can be open to the honest feedback, I mean, you have to find people whom you can trust to be honest with you. But if they can, if you trust them and they're saying, this is good and this is not so good, then then now it's no longer fictional. Now you kind of know, okay, maybe I can work on, and that one, and also something that is super important is thinking about like, how are you actually listening to other people? Because I might think, this is like the collective I might be thinking that people are listening to me and judging or thinking this and this and this about me. And then you think, well, what am I thinking about them? Well, I don't know because I wasn't listening to them because all I could hear was the voices in my head. So, you start to realize that you're way more critical of yourself than you are of other people. I have this play sometimes when I listen to recordings of myself playing. If I pretend that it's somebody else, it immediately gets better. Like, try it. Like, it's like or if I listen to a recording of somebody else, I think, oh my God, they're so great. And then I think, what if that were me? And I just record it. Now I start to hear flaws, and it's the same exact recording. So it's obvious that I'm listening with different ears with different levels of forgiveness from other people. But actually, I want to say something else about this too, because like I mentioned that when I first came to the NSO, let me backtrack a little bit. One thing that I never really struggled with too terribly was performance anxiety. I think that's, I don't know why. I'm just lucky, I think maybe, or I remember Van Hoosen telling me one time, like after recital, he's like, you play so much better in your recitals than you do in your lesson. What is the deal with that? I was like, I don't know. And, I think sometimes our level of imposter syndrome or self-consciousness or criticism makes us is a motivating factor. I mean, it can be a motivating factor to make you play better because you're like, you want to show maybe am I please tell me I'm good enough? How about this? Is this good enough now? And, it can be really motivating to work really hard and to figure things out. And, when you're in the practice room and you're thinking, okay, maybe this isn't good enough, if you can take that and do something positive with it and figure out how to make that better so that you'll be more comfortable with it, then that's productive. And I think this is where you have to ask yourself, like, what stories am I telling myself? What thoughts am I having about this? And is it productive? Like, does it help me at all to have this feeling about this passage? Like, if I'm feeling anxious, what if I loosen up? Is it better? Is it worse? And sometimes just like going through exercises like that can be like incredibly liberating. I mentioned when I moved to New Zealand, it was with the idea of sewing with this person and having a family and children and everything. And then that fell apart. And then an audition came up that I decided to take. And my goal with taking this audition was, it can never be to win it. I think that's folly to go into any audition thinking I'm going to win this one, but it's just to work hard and to try to keep my head in a place where I was enjoying the process and just not beating myself up. So if I was playing, this excerpt, I would think, first of all, how lucky am I that I have this music in my life in the first place? Like there were some excerpts. This was a second bassoon audition. So I had to play like the Brahms Violin Concerto and Tannhäuser, and those always really scared me, the low control-y kinds of things. And then I would just like listen to the music. I was like, this is so amazing. And I would just repeat that to myself, like, you are lucky that you have this in your life. And I would try to approach this stuff with that kind of an attitude. So, it made my process. I realized if I have those thoughts, I'd play just as well or better than I do when I have the thoughts that like, that's not good enough and somebody's going to judge you. I don't know if that's helpful at all. Like when I got to the NSO, like I said, I had won the second bassoon audition, and I wasn't even sure that I wanted that because I was assistant principal in New Zealand. I did like playing principal more than I liked playing second. So I thought, well, I'll just take a year off from here. And, I wasn't at that point really all that interested in moving back to America, quite frankly. So I thought, well, I'll just take a year off from the New Zealand Symphony, go and play for a year in the NSO on second bassoon, and then I'll reassess. And then when I got to play, when they said, actually, you're going to be playing principal for the year, I thought, oh, even better. And I literally, like I said, I was in my mid-30s at this point. I got some little stickers and I put them on my reed case with smiley faces on them to remind myself every time I open my reed box to like take a breath and think, try to enjoy this experience. What if this were the last concert you played ever? Like, what if this is the last time you ever get to play Firebird? Do you want this to be an experience where you're terrified, where you're feeling like people are judging you? Or do you want to enjoy that you're in the middle of this thing that's amazing? And that, I found that actually really helpful because, like I said, you start playing those games and you realize that the one thought isn't actually making you play any better. It's just protecting you. It's like you want to tell yourself you're bad before somebody else tells you you're bad.
Are you sure you don't moonlight as a life coach?
Many of the years when I was decades of therapy, there were years that I really thought, I'm going to quit music and become a charade. But then I was like, well, I can imagine the imposter syndrome I'd have if I were a charade. No, okay, I could do that.
So after hearing about your string of successful auditions, I can almost hear all of our listeners screaming at me to ask you about how you prepare for an audition, so leading up to the time of the actual audition. What is your practice regimen like?
Okay, now I can tell you I haven't done this for about 10 years, but I did my last audition was, and I'm going to just throw this in here in case I forget to mention it, because people often say that audition is like a young person's game and it's a different thing and it's harder to do it from a job. And that was not my experience at all. I had been in the NSO for, I don't remember how many years, but the LA Phil had an opening for principal, and Judy calls me. She says, "Hey, do you want to audition for the LA Phil?" And I was like, I really had not considered this. And she's like, "Oh, you should do it." And I'm sure they'll invite you to the semis. I think that's the way to get me to show up at an audition, is to invite me to the semis. I was in my 40s then, and again, just like with the NSO, however many years earlier, it came down to me and Bill Bookman. And again, he edged me out, but they actually didn't end up hiring either of them at the time. But we were like high-fiving each other. Yeah, 40-somethings. We were, yeah. And, so it's a different experience when you're coming from a job. But for me, it kind of congealed, I think, what I kind of, always felt when I was taking auditions, which is that the best headspace to be in is the one where you're actually playing in the orchestra. Because psychologically, getting back to the life coach thing, when you're playing in the orchestra, you're surrounded by people who love and support you and want you to do well, and you can hear their beautiful melodies. Like if I'm playing, that Brahms violin concerto on second bassoon, if I'm playing that as a second bassoon excerpt, it's like this terrifying test to see how soon I'm going to cack. If I'm playing it in the orchestra, it's like I'm the bottom of this amazing carpet under, a solo of the instrument that I kind of wish I had taken up but didn't. It's like you want to think of yourself as you are in the orchestra. So when I'm practicing for something like that, or when I used to, and I, obviously I did it many, many times, I would I had a kind of a routine for that, which was that, like 1 month before, 2 weeks before the audition, I'm doing daily run-throughs of the whole list in random order, like little slips of paper. You mix them up and you pull one out and you play it. The tape recorder's going. There's tape recorders back then. Cassettes. I had a cassette player. And I would play everything down in random order, and then I would turn the thing off. I'd go over and I'd listen and very scrupulously, make comments on, if anything was out of tune, if anything was out of rhythm, if anything didn't sound characterful or have the kind of articulation that I wanted or whatever. But in order to get at that point 2 weeks before, I need to be able to pretty much play everything on the list by like 4 weeks before and start to be maybe recording smaller groups of excerpts. Something that I used to do I found really super helpful was to group the excerpts according to like what skills they reveal about you. And then this gets into the whole psychology of it, which is, I think that it's really easy to look at an audition as some kind of test for a frowning jury, and they're looking for reasons to eliminate you, and all they want is the person who could come in and be perfect. And that's not a really helpful attitude to have, and I don't think it's realistic or true. I mean, they want somebody who's going to come and play in the orchestra and be their colleague and make them feel comfortable that they can make music with this person. So, you need to realistically ask yourself, like, why are they asking, this excerpt? And what is this excerpt? What are they going to infer about me as a musician from this excerpt? So, like, you miss a couple, you have a couple of tiny little response flubs, it's not a big thing. But if you have response flubs on every excerpt that shows whether you have good response, now they're like nervous. They don't want to play with you because you're going to mess up their, their big moment. I remember calling up Bert Hara after that same Minnesota audition and asking him, because once again I was in the finals and did not win the job, and actually, unfortunately, even after all my mind games, it was the Brahms violin concerto that he said the control just didn't sound quite flexible enough. And, I want to feel like if I'm playing a solo and I need to move a little earlier or later, that the second bassoon is going to be right there with me. And, and I thought, all right, that's, fair enough. It's like, I think sometimes people have this feeling like, why do I have to be able to nail Marriage of Figaro? Well, it's because we can tell a lot about your playing from Marriage of Figaro. So in your life, when you're playing, when you're playing your lessons, when you're playing whatever you're playing in your school ensemble or your quintets, you want to look for the aspects of your playing that you feel like hang you up in auditions. Like if you feel like, I'm pretty good at this, but maybe not so good at that other thing. Look for opportunities for that other thing to work on those in other situations. Because, we can get like really locked into like this excerpt and really tight about that. But it's not really that excerpt. It's like maybe I don't feel comfortable with my response there, or I don't feel comfortable that my articulation in the mid-register, it's clean enough, it cracks too often, or, whatever. So do you know what I mean? Like when I was playing in New Haven, so I was right out of Juilliard, and, and I would play, and I felt, comfortable in that job. But if I started to think, well, what if I'm playing this piece and it's on the audition for, my next major audition? Is it good enough for that? And why not? And what kind of thing about my playing do I feel like maybe I need to raise it up a level? So you want to in your life, not just as preparing for auditions, kind of sort of keep track of like which elements of playing seem to hang you up in auditions. Another thing that is really important, not just for preparing auditions, but in general, is like getting really honest feedback from other people, like I said, and which I continue to do to this day. So playing your stuff through for a critical, like an audience that scares you, somebody who intimidates you, or who, because you need to practice being nervous and you need to practice being realistic about what you can do on a given day. We've all had this thing where it's like, well, I've nailed this a few times. So like, yeah, now I can do it. But like, can you nail it 9 out of 10 times? And you're not thinking like nail it because I need to be perfect because they want a computer. No, it's because when you go and hear a major symphony orchestra, they usually kind of nail it. It's like they want somebody who's going to be clean and also expressive. So it's, I used to do this thing. So, backtracking back to my little calendar thing, I might, after a certain group I might have like, these are my sort of expressive balls to the wall. Like, here's my personality on excerpts. And then here's my like fast tonguing excerpts. And then here's my, this and that. Work on those together in sync so that I can keep those skills going. But then maybe take a handful of those excerpts, and I would make my little flashcards, and I would pick them up and I'll play it. And if I hit it the way I wanted to go, like on audition day, I'd write Y for yes on the card. And if I didn't, I'd write no, N. And then I just kind of throw it back in the mix. And I just kind of do this for a while just to get a sense of like, how consistent am I really? Because you can really kind of trick yourself into thinking you're more consistent than you are. And, so you want to know that these things are going to be there at your beck and call. But while you're working on nailing them and perfecting things and everything, you also want to make sure that there are times in your preparation when you are going for expression and personality and beauty, and let go of that part where I'm like, oh my gosh, this needs to be in tune. Because if you're playing really tight and careful and just trying to nail everything, you're probably not putting your personality and your soul into it. And I remember like after a while, it's like, yeah, I can play Scheherazade, whatever, that I can do. And I would be like only working on the technical things. And then I'd record myself and I'd listen and I think, gosh, Scheherazade sounds completely boring. And the things you need to over prepare the expression too, because you're going to get out there onto a stage, which may be hot or it may be cold, or it may be whatever it is. The warm-up room was the opposite temperature and, in the opposite resonance, and you've been standing outside, and now you're on the stage and you've just screwed up Beethoven 4. And the next thing up is Scheherazade. Now, if you can play a really interesting, expressive Scheherazade, there's a good chance that they'll say, we want to hear that person again, even though they screwed up Beethoven 4. But if you're like now super tight because you messed something else up and you don't have it somewhere in there to kind of dig deep and pull out and say, okay, I am still performing. This is a performance. Somebody once actually told me before an audition, don't play an audition, play a recital. And I thought that was a cool thing to say because, I spend a lot more time on the other side of the screen, and it is honestly, I think I'd rather be auditioning than be on the jury. It's so stressful. It's like such a huge responsibility. I feel so much empathy for the people auditioning, and here's another thing that people don't seem to know who are auditioning is that there's not really a they behind the screen. It's a group of individuals, that it's not, there, audition committees tend to, fluctuate. It's so, I mean, every orchestra probably has their own sort of makeup, obviously if it's a bassoon audition, all the rest of the bassoonists are going to be there and the principal wins. But then you have scattered representatives from the rest of from the orchestra. And, the next time around, it might be different scattered people from the rest of the orchestra. And, even though we all play in the same orchestra and have kind of the same idea of what's good, you'd be amazed at the differences of opinions and reactions that people have. And if you ask for comments, you will find that out very clearly because, I always used to get comments after these auditions since I was in the finals, and I usually knew somebody who knew somebody. And I'd literally get one person saying, you were probably the best bassoonist today, but you didn't play with enough personality. And then somebody else in the same committee, you really just played with too much personality, and that didn't sound like it would fit in our section. Or your Barded Bride, I've never heard tonguing like that. That was so amazing. And from somebody else in the same section, same instrument, your Barded Bride was a mess. What do I do with that? And that's only helpful in that it kind of goes into that category of things out of your control. Whatever version of that Serenity Prayer works for you. Cain no is mine. So it's like you want to get as much good feedback from people and improve as much as you can, and really work these excerpts up to the place where they sound like they would make sense in the context of actual orchestra. If you've never played the piece before, make sure you listen to a million recordings of it, play it along with the recording, visualize yourself with the other people around you so that it's not just, a trick, to see if I can get through this. You need to show that you need to, sorry, the dog is talking at the cat. If you're playing Tchaikovsky 4 and you want to, I got a story. Yay. So in the midst of the depths of my depressions about what am I going to do playing music here, I was in Memphis Symphony for my very brief stint there, and I was freaking out because I was like, I should have never left New York. I want to go back there, but maybe I should stay here, but maybe I should go to New Mexico because I won that job. I just had too many options, and none of them felt right because I was just absolutely paralyzed emotionally to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And on the last performance of Tchaikovsky 4, I just decided, again, somehow I'm going to enjoy this. I'm going to just put my emotions into this piece. And I got to that solo in the second movement in the end. And then afterwards, one of the random violinists I'd never met, she came up to me. She said, "Oh, my God, that was so beautiful. You made me cry."
Oh.
And I was so touched because I was like, it almost makes it like, okay, this is worth it somehow. This is, one of your people, I think it was Erin, during her was saying that, there's always somebody in the audience who's had a terrible day, who needs this, and you're giving them something by being on the stage and presenting this music. And, that's kind of how that felt to me. It just felt like I was just so happy for her somehow that she had managed to benefit from, my deep depths of neurosis, so that I was like, that is fantastic, and I'm glad you had that experience. But if you can do that in an audition, it's like, because everybody's going to be able to play Tchaikovsky 4, but if you can play it in a way that might make them cry, you win. or you don't. I can't say that there's no guarantees. And frankly, there's not a job. And no matter how great you are, I'm really, really, really sorry. But the reality is there are more fantastic people than there are orchestra jobs. So, and, but that, as you know, as you guys know, you've proven that you don't have to have an orchestra job to have a cool career in music. But I think that having these kinds of thoughts about it, that there's not a clear winner. This is a subjective thing. And so all you can do is, figure out how you want to play it, do your best to get to that level, be forgiving about the things that you haven't quite figured out yet, and be prepared for that too. So be prepared. Ideally we want to have every excerpt be the one where we hope that they ask because we're so great at that and we love to play it. That would be an ideal. And as you're preparing, it's probably good to kind of ask yourself, what would it take for me to feel that way about this excerpt? Which excerpts am I really scared of? How am I going to make friends with this? How am I going to get to that feeling where I'm grateful that this piece exists in my life and I get to participate in it and I can, play it. And then, like what I was saying before, look for opportunities in other things that you're playing to address those issues of your actual bassoon playing. Like Tchaikovsky's Six, there's a million opportunities to work on low response in other pieces, or in the tutti passages in the orchestra. Play some quiet long tones then, nobody will know. You can, you know what I mean? It's not just random notes or anything, but I use orchestra time a lot to kind of, we all do this. If we have some solo coming up, you might test something, 20 bars before, or even psychologically, okay, I know this is coming up, so let me just make sure my reed feels right in that place. And you might play, if you have a fortissimo D flat, you might play a pianissimo D flat in the same place to kind of get yourself, kind of in the mood for that. I think we all do that. Anyway, I do that. But also, when you're taking these auditions, it's all a process. You might win this one and you might not, but you want to, after every audition, there's life after this one. So let's say I haven't quite figured out how to, get everything to the level you wanted to. You want your goal in the audition to be to play as well as you can for that time in your life with those reeds and this preparation and this ability to tongue or whatever, and to know that there is life after this audition. And you're gonna keep working on that. It might take a few auditions to get to the point where you can comfortably lay down a Figaro or a Tchaikovsky Six or whatever. You might never get there where you're actually comfortable, but I'm saying it's if you go in with some kind of impression that you have to go in and be perfect, and you're just not there yet, chances are you're going to play much worse than you are because you're putting way too much pressure on yourself. You want to be realistic about where you are and perform, with love at that level, which is, is often, very high. I'm not talking about people who just absolutely have no chance, and or just shouldn't be auditioning because they're not at that level yet. But I'm thinking we play on excerpts and we're playing them for somebody. I'm going to play a run through, and this reed isn't really sounding so great. So and you're sort of making excuses in your head, because in your mind at some point you played a great reed. In reality, you played some reed at some point that played a beautiful Rite of Spring, and you might have that in mind that that's what's going to happen at the audition. But if that's not what's happening consistently in your run-throughs, then you have to accept that, do your best, but at a certain point accept, okay, this is where I am now. And so that when you go, to the audition and exactly what happened in the rehearsal room happens on stage, that you don't freak out and fold. When I was taking auditions, I used to watch a lot of figure skating. And I remember that the people who would just wipe out on their first jump, and then get up and just hang their head and barely finish their routine. It was so uncomfortable to watch. And then occasionally you get somebody who would just wipe out and then get up, and it was just oh, well, hell with that. And then they would just perform their asses off, and they would be amazing. And they would, it's now they're free, and all the pressure was lifted. And then sometimes those people win because, you want to be that person. You want to be the person who, like, no matter what you did. I mean, that's what you would do in a performance, hopefully. Do in the audition what you would do in a performance, which is that, okay, that's over. Let's move on. Let's make this nice, and let's be in this moment.
Sue, thank you so much for joining us on Double Reed Dish. This was a wonderful experience talking to you and allowing us to be in your living room with your wonderful sounding dog and cat.
I think she heard you say that because she just jumped up.
Oh. Where can our listeners find you on the internet?
Well, I don't have a web page. I used to think that I would make one, and then I just didn't. If they want to look at a couple of pictures of me, they can. The Kennedy Center has all the individual people, and there's a couple of 10 to 15-year-old videos of me talking about reed making in a tank top. I have a very limited presence on YouTube, including an excerpt from something I played at the IDRS conference a few years ago, which somebody turned into one of those goat videos, like the goat screams in the middle of my one. It's actually pretty awesome, and it has a lot more views than the original. So that's on there. But yeah, I haven't made a CD. I started one about 6 years ago, which I haven't bothered to edit. And my biggest presence, other than animal videos on Facebook, is that I like to do bike touring, and I've written a whole bunch of blogs of my trips. If people are interested in that at all, if you go to crazyguyonabike.com and search my name, you can read about what I do when I'm not playing the bassoon, which is like travel in foreign countries on my bicycle, which I highly recommend. You guys didn't ask about self-care or work-life balance, but I've got that down. I am away from the bassoon more than I'm with it, and it's all good.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that interview as much as we did. Be sure to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We also have our website where you can listen, or our YouTube channel where you can also listen if you prefer to do it that way. We would always love if you rate us on iTunes, and don't forget to subscribe. And be on the lookout for this Mavericks series. Should be out very soon.
Our next episode 12, features an amazing oboe guest. We are very happy to talk to Eugene Isotov for episode 12, so tune in for that.